Hennegan's Resident 104.4 FM. Flipping marvellous. How are you? I'm Nick Hennegan, and it's nice to welcome you once more to Literary London, where we look at all sort of things literary and Londony. Except, as you're probably aware, if you've been with us before, we tend to, diversify. And we're certainly diversifying this week, because this week we are celebrating the life and works of one Tennessee Williams. Oh yes, Thomas Lanier Williams III, to give him his full name, was born on the 26th of March 1911, of course better known by his pen name Tennessee Williams. Along with his contemporaries Eugene O'Neill and Arthur Miller, he's considered one of the three foremost playwrights of 20th century American drama. And I quite liked Williams as well for all sorts of reasons, actually. I mean, why wouldn't you? But he wasn't until he was 33 years old, so he'd had sort of fairly quite a few years of obscurity, that he suddenly became famous with the success of The Glass Menagerie, which was 1944. That came out in New York City, and then was the first of a string of successes, including A Streetcar Named Desire, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Sweet Bird of Youth, and Night of the Iguana. But with his later work, Williams attempted a new style that didn't completely appeal to audiences. But so he split a few critics, a few critical arguments. His father was a travelling shoe salesman who eventually became an alcoholic and was frequently away from home. His mother, Edwina, was the daughter of Rose O. Dakin, a music teacher, and the Reverend Walter Dakin. He got two siblings, an older sister and a younger brother. And he had nearly should have passed away when he was a kid. He had diphtheria that left him very frail. When he was 8 years old, his father was promoted to a job at the International Shoe Company in St. Louis. So they moved. So what can I tell you about him? Well, his literary influences, I think he often referenced some of the poets and writers that he most admired in his early years, include, of course, William Shakespeare, Arthur Rimbaud, Chekhov, D.H. Lawrence, Strindberg, Faulkner, Woolf, good lineup. And he was kind of struggling, as I say, as an artist. I do quite like some of his writerly quotes. Yeah, he had some great quotes, so let me see if I can find this here. Yeah, so at the age of 14, he said, I discovered writing as an escape from a world of reality in which I felt acutely uncomfortable. He also said, I'm a poet, and then I put the poetry in the drama. I put it in short stories, and I put it into plays. Poetry is poetry. It doesn't have to be called a poem, you know. He also said famously, if I got rid of my demons, I'd lose my angels. When I write, I don't aim to shock people, and I'm surprised when I do, but I don't think that anything that occurs in life should be omitted from art, though the artist should present it in a fashion that is artistic and not ugly. I set out to tell the truth, and sometimes the truth is shocking. I also quite like that he said, the strongest influences in my life and my work are always whomever I love. Whomever I love and am with most of the time, or whomever I remember most vividly. I think that's true of everybody, don't you? So, we're going to hear from Tennessee Williams. I mean, literally hear from him himself. Yes. I've got Tennessee Williams here, reading from his own works. And we're going to start with the opening monologue from The Glass Menagerie.
I have tricks in my pocket. I have things up my sleeve. But I am the opposite of a stage magician. He gives you illusion that has the appearance of truth. I give you truth in the pleasant disguise of illusion. I take you back to an alley in St. Louis. The time is that quaint period, the 30s, when the huge middle class of America was matriculating in a school for the blind. Their eyes had failed them, or they had failed their eyes, and they were having their fingers pressed forcibly down on the fiery braille alphabet of a dissolving economy. In Spain, there was revolution. Here, there was only shouting and confusion and labor disturbances, sometimes pretty violent in otherwise peaceful cities, such as Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis. That's the social background of the play. The play is memory. Being a memory play, it is dimly lighted. It is sentimental. It is not realistic. In memory, everything seems to happen to music. That explains the fiddle in the wings. I am the narrator of the play and also a character in it. The other characters in the play are my mother, Amanda, my sister, Lara, and a gentleman caller who appears in the final scenes. He is the most realistic character in the play, being an emissary from a world that we were somehow set apart from. But having a poet's weakness for symbols, I am using this character as a symbol, as the long-delayed but always expected something that we live for. There is a fifth character who doesn't appear other than in a photograph hanging on the wall. When you see the picture of this grinning gentleman, please remember this is our father who left us a long time ago. He was a telephone man who fell in love with long distance. So he gave up his job with the telephone company and skipped the light fantastic out of town. The last we heard of him was a picture postcard from the Pacific coast of Mexico containing a message of 2 words, hello, goodbye, and no address. I think the rest of the play will explain itself.
Ah, yes, the opening sequence, the opening monologue of The Glass Menagerie. We're celebrating the work and the life of Tennessee Williams. So, as I mentioned, American playwright, but he also wrote short stories, novels, poetry, essays, screenplays, and memoirs. He's kind of focused, I suppose, his plays often evolved from short stories, and they focused on character, emotional truth, and poetic language rather than plot. They explore the human condition, really, through all sorts of occasionally contentious subjects, and the characters struggle with frustration and delusion. But I should say, of course, as we mentioned some of his works earlier, A Streetcar, My Name Desire, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and The Glass Menagerie. Tennessee Williams adopted much of his best-known work for the cinema, and by 1959 he'd won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, 3 New York Drama Critics Circle Awards, 3 Donaldson Awards, and a Tony Award. Not bad, eh? In 1979, Tennessee Williams was inducted into the American Theatre Hall of Fame. He also wrote 2 novels, The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone and Moyes and the World of Reason, and an autobiography called Memoirs. Okay, that's not so unique, is it? But I thought we'd go back to the short story because there's a story sort of called The Yellow Bird, which I thought I'd share with you. Told from the third person. The focal character is Alma Tutwiler, a daughter of a minister and a wife. They live in Arkansas during the 1930s. And in fact, I'll let Tennessee Williams himself read the story to you.
Alma was the daughter of a Protestant minister named Increase Tutwiler, the last of a string of Increase Tutwilers who had occupied pulpits since the Reformation came to England. The first American progenitor had settled in Salem, and around him and his wife, Goody Tutwiler, née Woodson, had revolved one of the most sensational of the Salem witch trials. Goody Tutwiler was cried out against by the Circle Girls, a group of hysterical young ladies of Salem who were thrown into fits whenever a witch came near them. They claimed that Goody Tutwiler afflicted them with pins and needles and made them sign their names in the devil's book, quite against their wishes. Also, one of them declared that Goody Tutwiler had appeared to them with a yellow bird, which she called by the name of Bobo, and which served as interlocutor between herself and the devil, to whom she was sworn. The Reverend Tutwiler was so impressed by these accusations, as well as by the fits of the Circle Girls when his wife entered their presence in court, that he himself finally cried out against her, and testified that the yellow bird named Bobo had flown into his church one Sabbath, and, visible only to himself, had perched on his pulpit and whispered indecent things to him about several younger women in the congregation. Goody Tutwiler was accordingly condemned and hanged. But this was by no means the last of the yellow bird named Bobo. It had manifested itself in one form or another, and its continual nagging had left the Puritan spirit fiercely aglow from Salem to Hobbs, Arkansas, where the Increase Tutwiler of this story was preaching. Increase Tutwiler was a long-winded preacher. His wife sat in the front pew of the church with a palm leaf fan, which she would agitate violently when her husband had preached too long for anybody's endurance. But it was not always easy to catch his attention, and Alma, the daughter, would finally have to break into the offertory hymn in order to turn him off. Alma played the organ, the primitive kind of organ that has to be supplied with air by an old Negro operating a pump in a stifling cubicle behind the wall. On one occasion the old Negro had fallen asleep, and no amount of discreet rapping availed to wake him up. The minister's wife had plucked nervously at the strings of her palm leaf fan till it began to fall to pieces. But without the organ to stop him, increased Tutwiler ranted on and on, exceeding the 2-hour mark. It was by no means a cool summer day, and the interior of the church was yellow oak, a material that made you feel as if you were sitting in the middle of a fried egg. At last Alma despaired of reviving the nigger and got to her feet. "Papa," she said. But the old man didn't look at her. "Papa," she repeated, but he went right on. The whole congregation was whispering and murmuring. One stout old lady seemed to have collapsed because 2 people were fanning her from either side and holding a small bottle to her nostrils. Alma and her mother exchanged desperate glances. The mother half got out of her seat. Alma gave her a signal to remain seated. She picked up the hymn book. She brought it down with such terrific force on the bench that dust and fiber spurted in all directions. The minister stopped short. He turned a dazed look in Alma's direction. "Papa," she said, "it's 15 after 12 and Henry's asleep and these folks have got to get to dinner. So for the love of God, quit preaching." Now Alma had the reputation of being a very quiet and shy girl, so this speech was nothing short of sensational. The news of it spread throughout the Delta, for Mr. Tutwiler's sermons had achieved a sort of unhappy fame for many miles about. Perhaps Alma was somewhat pleased and impressed by this little celebration that she was accordingly given on people's tongues the next few months, for she was never quite the same shy girl afterwards. She had not had very much fun out of being a minister's daughter. The boys had steered clear of the rectory because when they got around there, they were exposed to Mr. Tutwiler's inquisitions. A boy and Alma would have no chance to talk in the Tutwiler porch or parlor while the old man was around. He was obsessed with the idea that Alma might get to smoking, which he thought was the initial and once taken irretrievable step toward perdition. "If Alma gets to smoking," he told his wife, "I'm going to denounce her from the pulpit and put her out of the house." Every time he said this, Alma's mother would scream and go into a faint, as she knew that every girl who's driven out of her father's house goes right into a good-time house. She was unable to conceive of anything in between. Now Alma was pushing 30 and still unmarried, but about 6 months after the episode in the church, things really started popping around the minister's house. Alma had gotten to smoking in the attic, and her mother knew about it. Mrs. Tutwiler's hair had been turning slowly gray for a number of years, but after Alma took to smoking in the attic, it turned snow white almost overnight. Mrs. Tutwiler concealed the terrible knowledge that Alma was smoking in the attic. She concealed it from her husband, and she didn't even dare raise her voice to Alma about it because the old man might hear her if she did. All she could do was stuff the attic door around with newspapers. Alma would smoke. She claimed it had gotten a hold on her and she just couldn't stop it now. At first she only smoked twice a day, but she began to smoke more as the habit grew on her. Several times the old man had said he smelled smoke in the house, but so far he hadn't dreamed that his daughter would dare take up smoking. But his wife knew he would soon find out about it, and Alma knew that he would too. The question was whether Alma cared. Once she came downstairs with a cigarette in her mouth, smoking it, and her mother barely snatched it out of her mouth before the old man saw her. Mrs. Tutwiler went into a faint, but Alma paid no attention to her, just went on out of the house, lit another cigarette, and walked down to the street to the drugstore. It was unavoidable that sooner or later people who had seen Alma smoking outside the house, which she now began to do pretty regularly, would carry the news back to the preacher. There were plenty of old women who were ready and able to do it. They had seen her smoking in the White Star drugstore while she was having her afternoon coke, puffing on the cigarette between sips of the coke and carrying on a conversation with the soda jerk, just like anyone from that set of notorious high school girls the whole town had been talking about for several generations. So one day the minister came into his wife's bedroom and said to her, "I have been told that Alma has taken to smoking." His manner was deceptively calm. The wife sensed that this was not an occasion for her to go into a faint, so she didn't. She had to keep her wits about her this time. That is, if she had any left after all she'd been through with Alma smoking. "Well," she said, "I don't know what to do about it, if it's true." You know what I've always said, her husband replied. If Alma gets to smoking, out she goes. Do you want her to go into a good-time house? Inquired Mrs. Tutwiler. If that's where she's going, she can go, said the preacher, but not until I've given her something that she'll always remember. He was waiting for Alma when she came in from her afternoon smoke and coke at the White Star drugstore. As soon as she walked into the door, he gave her a good hard slap with the palm of his hand on her mouth, so that her front teeth bit into her lip and it started bleeding. Alma didn't blink an eye. She just drew back her right arm and returned the slap with good measure. She had bought a bottle of something at the drugstore, and while her father stood there, stupefied, watching her, she went upstairs with the mysterious bottle and brown wrapping paper. And when she came back down, they saw that she had peroxided her hair and put on lipstick. Alma's mother screamed and went into one of her faints, because it was evident to her that Alma was going right over to one of the good-time houses on Front Street. But all the iron had gone out of the minister's character then. He clung to Alma's arm. He begged and pleaded with her not to go there. Please don't go there. Alma lit up a cigarette right there in front of him. She said, listen here. I'm going to do as I please around here from now on, and I don't want any more interference from you. Before this conversation was finished, the mother came out of her faint. It was the worst faint she had ever gone into, particularly since nobody had bothered to pick her up off the floor. Alma, she said weakly, Alma. Then she said her husband's name several times, but neither of them paid any attention to her, so she got up without any assistance and began to take a part in the conversation. Alma, she said, you can't go out of this house until that hair of yours grows in dark again. That's what you think, said Alma. She put the cigarette back in her mouth and went out the screen door, puffing and drawing on it and breathing smoke out of her nostrils all the way down the front walk and down to the White Star drugstore, where she had another Coke and resumed her conversation with the boy at the soda counter. His name was Stuff. That was what people called him, and it was he who had suggested to Alma that she would look good as a blonde. He was 10 years younger than Alma, but he had more girls than pimples. It was astonishing the way Alma came up fast on the outside in Stuff's affections. With the new blonde hair, you could hardly call her a dark horse, but she was certainly running away with the field. In 2 weeks' time after the peroxide, she was going steady with Stuff. For Alma was smart enough to know there were plenty of good times to be had outside the good time houses on Front Street, and Stuff knew that too. But Stuff was not to be in sole possession of her heart. There were other contenders, and Alma could choose among them. She started going out nights as rapidly as she had taken up smoking. She stole the keys to her father's Ford sedan and drove to such nearby towns as Lakewater, Sunset, and Lyons. She picked up men on the highway and went out juking with them, making the rounds of the highway drinking places. Never got home till 3 or 4 in the morning. It was impossible to see how one human constitution could stand up under the strain of so much running around to night places. But Alma had all the vigor that comes from generations of firm believers. It could have gone into anything and made a sensation. Well, that's how it was. There was no stopping her once she got started. The home situation was just indescribably bad. It was generally stated that Alma's mother had suffered a collapse and that her father was spending all his time praying, and there was some degree of truth in both reports. Very little sympathy for Alma came from the older residents of the community. Certain little perfunctory steps were taken to curb the girl's behavior. The father got the car key out of her pocket one night when she came in drunk and fell asleep on the sofa, but Alma had already had some duplicates of it made. He locked the garage one night. Alma climbed through the window of the garage and drove the car straight through the closed door. She's lost her mind, said the mother. It's that hair bleaching that's done it. It went right through her scalp, and now it's affecting her brain. They sat up all that night waiting for her, but she didn't come home. She had run her course in that town, and the next thing they heard from Alma was a card from New Orleans. She had got all the way down there. Don't sit up, she wrote. I'm gone for good. I'm never coming back. 6 years later, Alma was a character in the old French Quarter of New Orleans. She hung out mostly on Monkey Wrench Corner and picked up men around there. It was certainly not necessary to go into a good-time house to have a good time in the quarter, and it hadn't taken her long to find that out. It might have seemed to some people that Alma was living a wasteful and profligate existence, but if the penalty for it was death, well, she was a long time dying. In fact, she seemed to prosper on a new life. It apparently did not have a dissipating effect on her. She took pretty good care of herself so that it wouldn't have that sort of effect on her, eating well and drinking just enough to be happy. Her face had a bright and innocent look in the mornings, and even when she was alone in her room, it sometimes seemed as if she weren't alone, as if someone were with her in her room, a disembodied someone, perhaps a remote ancestor of liberal tendencies who had been displeased by the channel his blood had taken, till Alma kicked over the traces and jumped right back to the plumed hat cavaliers. Of course, her parents never came near her again, but once they dispatched as emissary a young married woman whom they trusted. This woman called on Alma in her miserable little furnished room, or crib as it actually was, on the shabbiest block of Bourbon Street in the Quarter. "How do you live?" asked the woman. "What?" said Alma innocently. "I mean, how do you get along?" "Oh," said Alma, "people give me things." "Do you mean you accept gifts from them?" "Yes, on a give-and-take basis," Alma told her. The woman looked around her. The bed was unmade and looked as if it had been that way for weeks. The two-burner stove was loaded with unwashed pots, in some of which grew a pale fungus. Tickets from pawn shops were stuck around the edge of the mirror, along with many, many photographs of young men, some splitting their faces with enormous grins, while others stared softly at space. "These photographs," said the woman, are these your friends?" "Yes," said Alma, with a happy smile, "friends and acquaintances, strangers that pass in the night." "Well, I'm not going to mention this to your father," said the visitor. "Oh, go on and tell the old stick in the mud," said Alma. She lit a cigarette and blew the smoke at her collar. The woman looked around once more and noticed that the doors of the big armoire hung open on white summer dresses that were covered with grass stains. "You go on picnics?" she asked. "Yes, but not church ones," said Alma. The woman tried to think of something more to ask or something more to say, but she was not gifted with an agile mind, and Alma's attitude was not encouraging to her. "Well," she said finally, "I had better be going." "Hurry back," said Alma, without getting up or looking in the woman's direction. Shortly thereafter, Alma discovered that she was becoming a mother. She bore a child, a male one, and not knowing who was the father, she named it John, after the lover that she had liked best, a man now dead. The son was perfect, very blond and glowing, a lusty infant. Now from this point on, the story takes a strange turn that may be highly disagreeable to some readers, if any still hoped it was going to avoid the fantastic. This child of Alma's would have been hanged in Salem if the circle girls had not cried out against Alma, which they certainly would have done. They would have gone into 50 screaming fits over Alma's boy. He was thoroughly bewitched. At 6:30 every morning he crawled out of the house, and late in the evening he returned with fists full of gold and jewels that smelled of the sea. Alma grew very rich indeed. She and the child went north. The child grew up in a perfectly normal way to youth and to young manhood. And then he no longer crawled out and brought back riches. In fact, that old habit seemed to have slipped his mind somehow, and no mention was ever made of it. Though he and his mother did not pay much attention to each other, there was a great and silent respect between them while each went about his business. When Alma's time came to die, she lay on the bed and wished her son would come home. For lately the son had gone on a long sea voyage for unexplained reasons. And while she was waiting, while she lay there dying, the bed began to rock like a ship on the ocean. And all at once, not John the Second, but John the First appeared like Neptune out of the ocean. He bore a cornucopia that was dripping with seaweed, and his bare chest and legs had acquired a greenish patina such as a bronze statue comes to be covered with. Over the bed he emptied his horn of plenty, which had been stuffed with treasure from wrecked Spanish galleons, rubies, emeralds, diamonds, rings, and necklaces of rare gold, and great loops of pearls with slime of the sea clinging to them. Some people, he said, don't even die empty-handed. And off he went, and Alma went off with him. The fortune was left at the home for reckless spenders. And in due time the son, the sailor, came home, and a monument was put up. It was a curious thing, this monument. It showed 3 figures of indeterminate gender astride a leaping dolphin. One bore a crucifix, one a cornucopia, and one a Grecian lyre. On the side of the plunging fish, the arrogant dolphin was the name inscribed, the odd name of Bobo, which was the name of the small yellow bird that the devil and Goody Tutwiler had used as a go-between in their machinations.
Tennessee Williams reading his own story, The Yellow Bird. Yes, I've always been quite fond of Tennessee Williams. As I say, we're celebrating the fact, of course, that he was born on the 26th of March in 1911. He passed away, rather sadly, of course, on the 25th of February 1983. So, it was not a bad career, was it? He was 71 years old, passed away in his suite at the Hotel Elysee in New York City. It was, a slightly surreal passing. I won't go into it now, but apparently he choked to death from inhaling the plastic cap of the type used on bottles of nasal spray. So the report was concealed originally. So it was sort of, difficult. But he was 71, and of course, a great star. And I hope you've enjoyed that little soup song of Tennessee Williams reading his own work. It's quite interesting, isn't it? If you'd like to get in touch with anything, then do. As always, you can get me radio@mavericktheatre.co.uk, radio@mavericktheatre.co.uk, or you can get me on Nick, N-I-C-K, at bohemianbritain.com, nick@bohemianbritain.com. If you've written anything, or if you're a Londoner, because it's called Literary London. But as you've just seen, we tend to go all around the world. So do get in touch. We're going to have another request show coming up fairly soon as well. If there's a particular poem or a song, or if you'd like to dedicate anything to anyone, then again, radio@mavericktheatre.co.uk. We'll get you to me. But that's all we've got time for this week. Thank you very much for your company. I'll see you next time. I'm Nick Hennegan, and this is Literary London. We're on bohemianbritain.com. That's my kind of messy little collection of all sorts of things on the interweb. But we are, of course, chiefly on London's charity music station. This is Resonance 104.4 FM.